Stange Belisco here, proprietor and operator of amateur radio station W1GV Whiskey 1 Good Vibrations. Way back in the 1960s, my dad helped me put together a room called The Lab. And it was actually a fallout shelter in our original house in Rochester, Minnesota, the house I grew up in. He helped me paint the walls. He helped me build the rig by buying the various different pieces of equipment to make it. And eventually, as amateur radio station WA0, Ocean Kilo Victor, I had a rig comprising a Hallicrafters SX130, a Viking Adventurer, E.F. Johnson Viking Adventurer transmitter, and a VFO made by a company called Night Kit, but it was already put together. And I hooked these things up, and I had my first VFO controlled radio down in the lab. The walls were kind of a pinkish tan color, and it was a really cool room. The thing did not have an electronic keyer. I used a straight key because the voltage was too high at the key terminals on that Viking Adventurer for any electronic keyer to handle, and I didn't know how to use one anyway. It had a back wave, meaning that you could hear the Night Kit oscillator even with the key up, although it didn't radiate over the air. Only when I pressed the key down did it radiate. And I had this thing, and when I wanted to switch from transmit to receive or receive to transmit, I had to throw a switch in the center of the table so that it would turn on the transmitter instead of just the oscillator. And that was my first rig as a radio ham. I had the general class license, which at that time, 1967, conveyed all amateur radio privileges. And the CW and voice bands were different then than they are now. They had different frequencies. But I remember making a lot of contacts with that 50 watts input to that Johnson Viking Adventurer. The output was probably only about 25 watts or 30 watts. And the antenna was a 40-meter dipole fed right down alongside one of the legs of the dipole. A poorly designed antenna, only about 10 feet off the ground between a couple of trees in the backyard, and a long run of RG8 coax down into the lab where I had the radios. There was a hole drilled in the side of the house, and it ran through the walls of the lab. You know how they sort of meander in a fallout shelter to keep the radiation out, give no direct straight line path to the radiation. And so with this 100+ foot line of RG8 coax running out to this poorly designed dipole, and a radio that you had to throw a switch to go from transmit to receive or vice versa, I always managed to get some contacts. Actually, the switch turned the VFO off. It literally turned the AC power of the VFO off so I could hear signals in the receiver. Otherwise, the receiver would be overwhelmed by the transmitter signal, but the back wave occurred during transmission. This radio, the SX Sierra X-ray 130 Hallicrafters receiver, had a separate antenna from the dipole that was used for transmitting. I just ran a wire out the out out the same hole and then out into the yard somewhere. And so I had a rig, and I sometimes thought about, I wonder what it would be like to rebuild that rig, to find the different components somewhere on the in the advertisements in QST magazine, and find them and put them together and make a replica of that original rig. I thought it'd be kind of nostalgic and kind of fun. But then I began to think about the rig I have now and the lab in the basement that I have now, and how much cooler what I have now is than what I had then, and how much trouble it would be to recreate that rig. So I've decided against that. But I was just daydreaming about that last night, daydreaming at night, of course, as radio hams often do, and just thought, kind of a neat idea, but not as neat as what I have now. So I decided to just get on the air when I can, tell you about the rig and what I the way that I had it put together, and hope that you are somewhat interested at least. Stan Gibilisco saying 73, which means best regards, and so long, which in my native fist then, just as today, always translated to da 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 da.